This week, a Beijing-backed court in Hong Kong sentenced Catholic media magnate and democracy icon Jimmy Lai to 20 years in prison. Now, this is the harshest sentence ever handed down under China's national security law. Lai is 78 years old. He's suffering from heart disease, diabetes, failing eyesight, and he has spent 5 years largely in solitary confinement. Here tonight with reaction, Jimmy's son, Sebastien Lai, and President Emeritus of the Acton Institute, Father Robert Sirico. Gentlemen, I'm so glad you're here and gave us the time. Sebastien, I want to start with you. 3 of these CCP-vetted judges handed your father's sentence down, 20 years in prison. A man who, even as the sentence was read out, he was smiling and put his hands together to greet those watching from the gallery. What was going through your mind when you saw that moment, and what did that smile mean to you?
It really meant the world. I know it's a little sign, but it's a sign that my father is still fighting. That, you know, I think a lot of people in the situation that he's in, facing these horrible odds, you know, in solitary confinement for the last 5 years, at his age, given his health deterioration, would feel despair. But I think he's a man who knows that he did the right thing at every turn. He's a man who, as he said, could have left and lived comfortably, but decided to stay and live meaningfully and protect his journalist. And I think that smile says it all. It says that, you know, you might have shackled my body, but you have not shackled my spirit, and you have not shackled my faith.
Sebastien, your sister Claire was with you at the press conference earlier this week, and she put it very starkly there.
The life expectancy of the average male in Hong Kong is 83. My father was handed a 20-year sentence. He is 5 years from 83. I mean, just looking at this objectively, you know, this has to be solved.
Sebastien, given what you know about his condition now, no sunlight, no access to the Eucharist at times, heart problems, diabetes, what condition is he in at this moment?
It's absolutely horrible. I mean, everybody knows someone who is around the age of my father, who's you know, in the late 70s, early 80s. Imagine that person, and no matter how strong they are, put them in a little cell, 60 square feet, with no natural light, in solitary confinement. You know, no contact with anybody. If you do that for 100 days, even 100 days, I don't think the odds of survival are very high. And he's been in those conditions for 1,800. It's absolutely inhumane, and it's worse than actual criminals. And it's an attempt to break him. It's an attempt to break this very courageous man.
Yeah. Father, you've known Jimmy Lai for 25 years, and I mean, just to acquaint people who may not be totally familiar with the story, he was running what is essentially the New York Times of Hong Kong, Apple Daily. They shut down the paper, they fire all of his staff, shutter everything, because of the democracy protests that they were covering.
So that's all before the trial, mind you.
Right. No, before the national security law was passed, right?
Right.
So they retroactively charged him with a law that hadn't been on the books yet.
Exactly.
He stayed in the country, as Sebastien said, to defend his journalists and to defend his honor and his right to speak his mind as a Hong Kong citizen. You met him there in 1998. I know Bill introduced you to Jimmy Lai in 1998, yes. Father, and he was, of course, Jimmy's godfather. Now comes this sentence. As a priest, as a friend, what was your reaction when you heard this verdict?
Well, I mean, it wasn't a surprise, let's put it that way, but you can call it 20 years, but you've already established the fact that this really is a life sentence. This is what communists do, and I think Sebastien is very right to underscore that they have not been able to even dent this man's confidence and sense of transcendent morality in facing this. And he's doing it not just for himself, but for the other defendants in this case, and indeed for the Chinese people, for those in Hong Kong and the Chinese people on the mainland, because this is an issue that has to be dealt with at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Father, you testified before Congress, the Executive Committee on China, in 2023, and you asked When was the last time you saw a totalitarian government put someone through their court system and have them come out innocent? I mean, does this sentence hit harder, though? I mean, yes, we expected it, but is it worse than you expected at this point? I thought they might release Jimmy just because of the international pressure and attention.
I don't know what Sebastien thinks. I never thought for a moment they were going to release him. Not for one single moment. I mean, I'm hopeful that he will be released, which is different than the communists releasing him of their own volition.
Right.
I think that may come through negotiations, but I didn't think they would do that.
Sebastien, President Trump has a planned visit in April to Beijing. You said that your father's case is a litmus test for any engagement we have with China. What do you mean by that?
I mean that if we, the phrase that the UK government uses, for example, is normalization of relationship with China, a closer engagement. Well, how can we normalize relationships if my father is still in prison in Hong Kong? This is a man who has stood up for the best of the freedoms that unites us as democracies. A man who at every turn decided to do what was right, what was courageous. We're never going to normalize what is happening to him. That's completely unacceptable. And if they can't even put a 78-year-old man on a plane and send him back to the United Kingdom, to the US, then it's very telling of the relationship going forward, of what they think of the relationship. And
a British citizen.
Look, I honestly think,
underscore that. Your father's a British citizen.
Yeah. He's only a British citizen. He doesn't have any other citizenship. He's not a Chinese citizen. It's also worth noting that this is a relatively simple thing for China to do, for Hong Kong and China to do, in the sense of it will take them 2 hours to put him on a plane and send him back, at not just zero costs. It would be directly beneficial to them as well. And look, I mean, every single person looking at this case sees the abuse of this old man. And I don't see how that's beneficial for China's reputation. I don't see how it's beneficial for Hong Kong's reputation. And I think Hong Kong has essentially done very badly by China in the persecution and cruelty that they have shown to my father.
Yeah, over a law that wasn't on the books. It was passed after the alleged actions by your father. I mean, that's the most galling thing. This judicial process was a total sham. But Sebastien, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has called for a humanitarian parole for Jimmy Lai, for your father. The British Foreign Secretary has also called this tantamount to a life sentence. Are we hearing enough from the British government? And what do you make of Starmer, the Prime Minister? He seems to have very warm relations with Xi at this point.
Yeah, look, as I said before, the idea is that with warm relationship, these cases will be raised. Well, my father's case is the ultimate litmus test for UK and China Hong Kong relationships. This is something that if the Prime Minister can't bring one British citizen home, a man who again stood for so much of what makes a democracy, courage. If they can't even do that, then it's very telling of the relationship. Yes, and how that looks like when someone's willing to defend those values until the very end, and still does to this day.
Are you hopeful the Trump meeting in April could bear fruit? That Trump could press Xi on this?
We've been so grateful for the support that we've had from the president. I think, look, he obviously cares about the case, and I'd like to thank him from the bottom of my heart. He's given our family so much hope, and I think if there is a person who can do it, a master negotiator, a person who cares about freedom around the world, it would be him to do it. So I really hope that the president saves my father's life.
Father, so far this case has not gotten the media attention that, say, Nelson Mandela got. Why isn't this on the front burner of journalists and the media? And where is the Vatican? Is that China deal sealing their lips?
Well, let me start with the last question because I think there's been a shift in the Vatican. I mean, the Holy Father has met with Claire and Teresa Lai, Mrs. Lai, and I have reason to believe that the Holy Father has given assurances of his prayers. And when you deal with diplomatic relations, you know, these things go on behind the scenes. I think there's been a shift uh, in the sense of the Vatican's relationship to Jimmy Lai. Um,
Mm-hmm.
then there's the question of the media in general. This is hard to understand when, and it's not unique because there are many other things going on in the world right now where the media is not paying attention. The
Right.
whole Iran thing, and what you see is this kind of bias of the establishment media. Jimmy Lai has made no secret of his advocacy of the free market. It's part and parcel of his whole advocacy of human freedom in general. And so, and then I don't know to what extent this plays a role in this, but he's a devout man. He's a Christian and a serious Christian convert, and I think that is what's sustaining him in prison right now, in defiance of the communist dictatorship.
Sebastien, are you surprised? We've been hearing all these Olympic athletes sound off on everything from ICE to Trump, using this international stage and platform. I was struck that no one raised the case of your father. If you want to talk about freedom, you want to talk about democracy, if you want to talk about unity of peoples and purpose, where is that cause being raised?
You know, I obviously wish that they did raise my father's case. Look, I think it's a case where if we talk about symbolism and heroism, it's got all the elements there. I mean, you know, a lot of these athletes, Olympians, are seen as champions of their nations. Well, here is my father, a champion of democratic values, a man who has given so much for freedom and keeps giving so much for freedom, and you know, in an incredible act of bravery, puts himself in front of his journalists to defend their freedom, and I think any athlete, or indeed any person who hears my father's story, can't help but be touched by that bravery. So I you know, obviously I wish they did speak out for my father, and I'd be very grateful if they did.
They should be. They should be. And Father Sirico, very quickly, I know you came in contact with a list of what Jimmy Lai has been reading in recent days in his confinement. And when you were mentioning this to me earlier, I kept thinking of Thomas More and our man we both knew, Cardinal Van Thuan of Vietnam, who was, you know, also found himself in solitary and converted people. That deep sense of not only faith but redemptive suffering. Tell me what he's reading there.
Yes. Well, I've seen a partial list, and this is 133 books, and I don't mean light devotionals. I mean Augustine's City of God, the Summa Theologica, Romano Guardini. Some seminarians may not have read these things. Ratzinger, John Paul II, and as you mentioned, Francis Xavier Nguyen Van Thuan, who spent 13 years in a communist prison in Vietnam. Also the prison journals of Cardinal Pell, who was unjustly confined in Australia until he was unanimously exonerated by their Supreme Court, and numerous other books. And this is what sustains him. You know, Raymond, we're talking about this on the eve of Lent. And I like to see this. And I have no doubt that Jimmy is thinking something along these lines. We are about to enter the period of the church's retreat, of its silence, of the embrace of penance and suffering, so that the suffering of Christ that we identify ourselves with comes to be the thing that redeems the world, even in the face of Good Friday, which was the heart of darkness. And Jimmy is facing the heart of darkness right now. But Satan's pride comes to nothing on Easter Sunday. There is triumph. And I believe with all my heart that Jimmy has tasted that triumph already, one way or the other.
Yeah. Sebastien, I want to give you the last word. Your father arrived in Hong Kong when he was 12 years old as a stowaway. He was hidden in the bottom of a fishing boat, dreaming of freedom. He built an empire, founded a newspaper, founded a faith, and now is really pouring himself out into that faith and using it to sustain him. And he supported the people of Hong Kong. Now he sits in the cell in Beijing. Beijing says he was the mastermind of some conspiracy. I heard the silly Chinese global television referring to Jimmy Lai as the instigator of the anti-China riots when they gleefully announced his verdict. If your father could hear us tonight, if he could hear from our viewers, what would you want him to know?
That we're very proud of him. Many people in the world view him as a hero. But when people think of men like him, men who do these brave acts of courage, of continuous courage, they think of these men as men who have no fear, and that's not true. I know my father. I know that he fears just as anybody else does to die alone, to never see his family again, to not be able to sleep in his own bed for one last time. But what he has done is that he refuses to be intimidated by that fear. And I think in my father's story, you have a man who was called out by fate and by his faith, and he answered that call. And if he hears this one day, I just want him to know how incredibly proud of him I am for that.
Well, God bless you both. Sebastien Lai, Father Robert Sirico, I thank you both for being here. We will continue speaking about Jimmy, reporting on his case and his situation, and we remain hopeful and pray for his release. You can see the excellent documentary about Jimmy Lai, if you haven't, The Hong Konger, which Father Sirico had a hand in, at freejimmylai.com. Watch it, experience it, see who we're talking about. Thank you both.